Hey, this is Krista Cheetah, and I'm here with the Mom Minute today. And I've been sharing from my prayer sheet of what I've been praying for my kids and also kids that I ministered to throughout the years. And now I'm praying it for my grandchildren, and I'm also praying it for my students at school. So we have talked about, or I've just kind of shared the last couple weeks, I have 4 areas that I just am focusing on prayer. I really am praying for a generation to walk in purity. And so just what that encompasses. So a couple weeks ago, I did the first focus, saying yes to God. And then this last week, I shared on just the things that I pray for community, having peers that walk as wise along with your children, and then having mentors, having spiritual fathers and mothers, leaders, pastors that are involved in your children's lives as well. And today, my third focus is God's design for sexual intimacy. And I do feel like this is this is really on the attack and has been for quite some time, but it seems that the farther, or maybe the closer we get to the end of this age, the enemy is just on assault with this one. And part of what, with all of them, I'm going to say, is that the Lord told me, like I heard it very, very clear, probably about 5 years ago. I remember sitting in the prayer room, maybe 4 years ago, and I was praying for this for a purity generation. And it was like there was a voice in my head, and I just felt like the Lord was speaking to me, and what I heard was, there is a battle for the hearts of the children. And children has been such a focus of my life, even with the prayer room, that, I just wanted children. I wanted families to learn how to make your home. And I want families to know, how do you make your home an altar to God? And how do we bring children into prayer and worship, and that they would know their voice matters? So in this design, God's design for sexual intimacy, I feel like there's such confusion. There's this gender confusion now. Not only is it, I hope my children don't have sex before they get married. Now it's just, there's just so much more confusion around this. And it is just like the enemy to take something beautiful that God has created as this amazing intimacy, this divine design for a husband and a wife, and the enemy's taken it and skewed it and twisted it and makes it look like his ideas are better. And as you and I both know, that is not true. And when you follow God's plan, it is the most beautiful gift that you and your spouse can share with one another. So in this, as we're praying for it, the first scripture, I have several scriptures I'll share again today. Psalm 119:9 says, "How can a young man keep his way pure? By living according to your word." And so I just, in that I'm praying for a generation that would walk the way of purity. They walk God's way. They walk the narrow path, and that they would be intentional about seeking out, what does God say about all of these things? And 1 Peter 5:8 says, in fact, we just talked about this in my classroom this week, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour." And moms and dads, we know that if we are not protecting our children and setting gates around our home, at the doors, we have gates where their eyes can see, the things that their ears hear. We want to protect our children in this realm when they're little. And then we want to also just have a guard when they're older. So we want our kids to grow up to be sober and to be vigilant and to be intentional and to watch for the ways that the enemy would be working around them to scheme and to steal, kill, and destroy, to lie. That's all the enemy does. The other scripture I pray is 1 Corinthians 6:18. And this just is, flee from sexual immorality. So I just pray that young people would have a boldness to flee from sexual immorality and to flee from temptation, flee from pornography, Flee from, even for girls, I think one of the things that I talked about when I would mentor young women is that where boys might be caught up more in pornography, girls can have the same wrong heart values when they're watching even romantic comedies and thinking that that's what romance looks like, that's what sex looks like, that's what relationships look like. So really praying that kids would be discerning, that as they grow into teenagers, they would be vigilant. They would abstain from the sinful desires that would even draw them. And we know that moms and dads, we have to come around them for that as well. Also, Hebrews 13:4 says, honor marriage and guard the sacredness of sexual intimacy between wife and husband. God draws a firm line against casual and illicit sex. That, of course, is the Message translation. So just praying for the marriage covenant of sexual intimacy to be kept and honored by husband and wife. And in that, I also pray that kids would get a vision for their purity, a vision for their wedding day. You know, we will work hard and fight for something, and we'll endure the pain of a goal we have for the future. If you ever are, if you work out or you diet, or you want to start having a time with the Lord, you get a vision for it, and then you're willing to pay the price because you know that there's a benefit in the long run. So I just pray that young people would have a vision for their purity. They'd have a vision for their wedding day of what they desire, what that's going to look like. And then they would stay faithful to have that vision come to fruition so that they can do the hard things so that that beautiful day can be all that they imagined that it could. Another one I pray is Genesis 2:24 and 25. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. The man and his wife were naked and felt no shame. And this is just praying for young men and women to enjoy sexual intimacy in the context of marriage, that they would then, when that day comes, they would be totally vulnerable and unashamed with one another. And one of the other things I pray in this is that teens, they would surround themselves with friends that are making those same commitments. And I know it's so hard because the world that we're living in is kind of do whatever you want. And even in this value in the Christian circles, this value of sexual intimacy being saved for marriage and then living that out to the fullest in marriage and the beauty that is and the creativity that there is in that, there isn't a real high value for that from what, just the people I talk to and the kids I talk to and the teens I talk to and the young people I talk to. So I'm just really praying that they would, and pray for your kids, that in that place, they would surround themselves with others that would have that same value system so they can encourage one another, they can hold each other accountable, they can stand with one another, they can even pray for one another. And then the last one in this is 1 Thessalonians 4:3-6. It is God's will that you should be sanctified, that you should avoid sexual immorality, that each of you should learn to control your own body in a way that's holy and honorable, not in passionate lust like the pagans who do not know God. And in this matter, no one should wrong or take advantage of a brother or sister. So really praying that there's a generation that's on the rise that would follow God's design for sexual intimacy, and that would affect the culture around you. And I really want to encourage you moms, dads, adults, mentors, to walk with your children in this and to be really open about that if you have known me for a while, that is something that I talk about a lot in this place of purity, that Greg and I were really open with our kids, and we gave them, we just had lots of communication in our home about their bodies, about sexual intimacy, about the joy that there is in marriage. This isn't like, praying for God's design isn't in a way to hold you back from the kids back from any fun and excitement. It is actually to have the richness and the fullness of that to be expressed toward one another. So I think the more honest that we can be in talking with our kids and praying with our kids and really involving ourselves in our children's lives so that They know that we're for them and we're not against them. God is for them. He gave us this gift. This wasn't like the enemy's idea. God gave us the gift of sex, and so that we would be faithful to do it the way that God has beautifully intended it. So that is my point 3, God's design, praying for God's design for sexual intimacy. And we all make mistakes and we all fail, and there are times where sin enters, but our kids need to know that there's nothing they could ever do that would keep us from loving them or being with them to walk through whatever they have done. There's nothing that would hinder our love toward them. So when you're even praying for them and when you're talking about it, make sure they know that you're always on their side and you always love them. And you are going to walk them through whatever. If they've made some mistakes, God is the Redeemer, and we will help redeem them as well. So, all right, that's it for the Mom Minute this week. Next week will be the very last prayer point on my sheet, which is praying for purity in body, soul, and spirit. So, all right, until next week, have a blessed week. Do not be afraid to talk about these things and have these hard conversations, and keep communication open. The more you talk about it, starting when they're really young, not littles, but actually don't keep quiet too long. Have these conversations so that it's always awkward when they're older, but it's less awkward if you've been talking about it really openly in your family, and to pray together about it. If you have a daughter, start asking her to pray for her husband, and you as well, Mama, be praying for the man that your girls will marry, and be praying for the woman that your son will be marrying. And we know that prayer changes things. Prayer affects the heart. Prayer matters, and God hears all of them and acts on because we love him. He acts on what we say and what we ask. So, all right, until next week.